Hello, I'm Benjamin Fox. I'm the opinion and Brexit editor at Euractiv.com. And today I'm joined by Professor Fabio Masini from the Department of Political Science at the University of Rome. And Fabio is also the managing editor at Euractiv Italy. And today we are having the first of what I hope will be a series of discussions on the Conference on the Future of Europe. Fabio, we've just had the launch of the Conference on the Future of Europe. And what are your hopes for this 1 year or potentially 2 year process? And are we going to end up with just a talking shop at the end of which nothing much happens, or are we at a point where we're going to have a real seismic shift in the direction of European integration?
Distinguish between hopes and expectations. My hopes, at least 2 years ago, when the conference was launched by Macron, as we know, were very high, as probably were very high the expectations of many people to reach some kind of revolution, let's say, or at least a dramatic change in the way Europe works. During the pandemic, and now, of course, now that we see how the conference was engineered by the institutions, hopes are, of course, still high, but the expectations are very, very low. Many flaws in this governance and structure of the conference, which do not allow for many hopes, let's say. One of them is the
Yeah,
way that citizens are involved, because this was intended as a bottom-up legitimation of a transformation, of a change, profound change of the European Union. Nowadays, citizens are not that much involved, and also the quality of citizens chosen randomly. I know that there is a lot of literature saying that random choice is very good for democracy, but at the same time, here we are not speaking about just having an idea of Europe. It's to provide ideas, concrete ideas, and means to change Europe. So I think that competencies, skills required are very high, and we cannot just choose randomly the people.
does it matter that Emmanuel Macron, whose baby this was, now appears to have distance himself from the conference?
Well, of course, it matters, because without a specific political leadership, the expectation is that this conference will become a sort of chat rather than conference. It will become a place where people discuss about the future of Europe, but not discuss really about how to change this kind of Euro to make it more effective, to give it more global actorness, to be able to tackle the needs and satisfy the needs of 450 million people.
I think perhaps the complete abandonment of unanimity in EU decision making, revision to changes to taxation policy. Um, One of your ideas was that the European Parliament should be given responsibility for drafting a new constitutional framework. Um, how would this suite of ideas work in practice?
The end of the unanimity vote in whatever kind of collective decision making, the changing of the fiscal autonomy, let's say, the making of a fiscal autonomy for the union, not just from national contributions, but being able to have a fiscal capacity, an autonomous fiscal capacity to run an autonomous budget. Because now, for example, the debate is concentrated on the idea of the next generation EU and how to make it become, let's say, stable. No, but this is not the issue. The issue is to create a budget that allows picking from the public beds of Europe, and to provide incentives, resources to finance public goods. This is the crucial aspect of the future. And or at least these are the two crucial aspects of the future. Of course, there is also a foreign policy, which is a single foreign policy. I mean, generally speaking, a global actorness for Europe in the world. Because if Europe does not want to let's say to be killed by international competition, it needs to be a global actor.
I guess one of the things that I have taken away from the debate on the next generation EU and the Sure program, where is that we've kind of, it reminds me a little bit of the stability mechanism and the kind of institutional changes that came out of the Eurozone crisis, where we get this very quite kind of piecemeal set of different emergency mechanisms that are done on an ad hoc basis in response to a crisis. But then that kind of lays the seed for them, for these institutions then becoming part of the EU framework. I mean, when you borrow 800 billion euro, it's going to have to be, it has to be financed somehow. And so de facto, in 10, 20 years time, there will have to be some kind of EU treasury or taxonomy that comes out of this. Is it better to allow this process to happen just organically rather than codify it right now?
Well, I think that we need a dramatic change also on this. You're right. I mean, we are witnessing a series of ad hoc measures, and we see an increase in intergovernmentalism in decision making, which are, of course, are not the very best solution to be effective and reactive and timely in responses, especially to major crises. We saw it in 2009, between '09 and 12, let's say, when the financial crisis from the United States became the euro area sovereign debt crisis. The reaction was intergovernmental, was with ad hoc measures. It was not a stable, there was no creation of a stable mechanism, an instrument to tackle crisis and to stabilize the European economy as a whole. This is exactly what we need, at least in the very short run.
We did get a Eurozone bailout fund at the end of it, even though several member states. I mean, economic policy seemed to be run by Berlin for about 2 or 3 years during that crisis. But eventually, they got Mrs. Merkel and Wolf Schäuble. They got dragged. They got dragged to a common fund.
We cannot wait for these people to be dragged by what happens. Let's say we cannot rely on the will of enlightened elites, because it might even happen that we don't have enlightened elites in the future, the coming future. I mean, there are the next in the next few months there will be the elections in Germany, and there will be then the elections in France, and then sooner or later there will be elections again in Italy. And all these three countries are rather, let's say, on the verge of falling back again to Eurosceptical narratives, also in politics. So the problem is to change the mechanism, not to change the people, because people might change, but if you are not effective in mechanism, stabilizing the mechanism, you risk coming back, and this is something that the European integration process cannot afford, I think.
I remember, 10 years ago, and even before, following the germ of the Treaty of Lisbon, and then what happened afterwards. And I think back then, the kind of us Brits were always referred to as the awkward partners and the skeptical voice whenever whether it was Maastricht um, or the constitutional treaty. And now now that we're out, we seem to have been replaced by the Poles and the Hungarians and maybe the Czechs as the kind of the blockers of integration. Would you say that they're just the Frugals? They're just as much blockers of progress than several of the Visegrad countries?
Of course, each country has its own specificities, and it's absolutely correct that each country has its own specificities. The only problem is that these national, country specific, let's say, specificities cannot block the whole Europe.
I guess the kind of the catch-22 of all this is that any kind of the European integration process almost inevitably requires unanimity at some level.
I do not think that we require unanimity. I mean, in national contests, we don't have unanimity. I mean, if we don't abandon unanimity, we cannot really go anywhere. Of course, sometimes you can reach some kind of compromise, as was last July. I mean, we reached a historical compromise, but at the same time, we had to give up some kind of other important values of Europe. For example, the rule of law.
What you mentioned, you know, an increased role for the European Parliament a few minutes ago. Could you flesh that out a bit?
Well, the European Parliament has the legitimation and therefore should have the mandate or take assume its mandate to rewrite a European constitution. Maybe you don't call it constitution, maybe you call it fundamental law, maybe you call it PIPO or whatever you want. But we have to rewrite the way European citizens and their collective representatives stay together. And this, of course, cannot be done with the same mechanism that we used in 2003. It has to be something completely different. For example, you have to decide in advance that whoever decides to stay in will be able to create a new thing, whatever it will be, to become a sort of federation. We can call it like that. If that is the aim, okay, some countries will become a federation, others will stay out. This is the last chance that the national interest can have in saying no, because of course you cannot be obliged to get into a club, let's say, if you want to speak about clubs. So you should have the possibility to say no, but you should not have the possibility to say with your no, no to the others. You cannot stop completely the whole integration process because one country says no. This is absolutely unacceptable, and this should be made clear.
So, but by that logic, we're looking at a number of current EU member states probably leaving or potentially leaving.
I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure. Um, I'm not that much sure that in the end, the national democracies in a referendum, for example, or even in a parliamentary vote, would decide to go against the decision for a big, effective club of Europe. Because, of course, if it is effective and it is able to tackle the issues that are currently under our eyes, global challenges, internal challenges, and the historical challenges, let's say. Of course, it's up to us, to the club of those countries and those people who are most convinced that this kind of further integration process is needed to show that it's more effective.
Do you think that the European Parliament really does have the legitimacy to be able to take on this kind of exercise? I mean, we still have a situation where, I mean, in all honesty, we can't say that there are genuinely European elections because there's not really, because there are European political families and groups in the European Parliament, but the man and woman in the street in towns and villages across the continent have no idea who they are. Um, and turnout is still pretty low for European elections. So, can we really say that it has that legitimacy?
You are completely right. There's a problem of legitimacy even for the European Parliament. At the same time, it's the only institution which has some legitimation to speak for the whole 450 million European citizens. Of course, the legitimation depends on many things. So I think that there should be truly transnational lists, for example, at the European Parliament polls, in the next even polls, possibly. The European parliamentary groups should be more political, let's say, than they are now, because still polity is much at the or mostly even at the national level. But that's a reason. There's a reason why this still happens because power, or at least the what is considered to be power, the possibility to choose, for example, the chairs, the CEOs of the big companies is in the hands of governments, national governments. There's no power at the level of European Parliament.